All right, class, let's get going with our topic here, 18th century society. Our essential question: how did parts of the society, such as economics, change due to the new advancements in the scientific revolution? We had people like Adam Smith putting out new ideas pertaining to economics, and others during this time, and it really began to change how the government looked at the things that were going on in the world, not only in Europe, but around the world, especially due to trade. Mercantilism, European maritime expansion becomes fundamental to the European economy. Sugar from the Atlantic trade was most important, so was tobacco, cotton, indigo. Spain and Portugal empires began to grow again where they had declined in the past. They started to grow once more. English had the most immigrants to the New World. So the English were migrating to the New World at this point much, much faster than others. The main goal of European countries was self-sufficiency. Mercantilism was to create a favorable balance of trade, so your country is receiving much more money and to increase the economy, much more so than putting stuff out. Bullionism is countries build up large reserves of gold and silver. Now, large companies form new governments, such as the British East India Company. Now, Great Britain was the world's leading maritime power. They created the Bank of England in 1694, which was something that was new at that time. British mercantilism was differed from France, whereas the one in mercantilism in Britain helped all of the people, not only the government. In France and most countries in mainland Europe, mercantilism was more to help the government rather than the people. Parliament passes the Navigation Act, which reduced the amount the Dutch and others could trade with the British colonies. So at this time, the British colonies were by far the most money makers for the people in Europe. And the British passed this Navigation Act, and then the only ships that could go to the colonies in the New World, British colonies, were the British. So the Dutch then took a huge hit and started to lose money. We had the triangular trade, dealt with Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. There were a couple different triangular trades I think a lot of us are familiar with. Goods, finished goods leaving Europe, heading to Africa. We've got slaves going from Africa to the Caribbean, and then you had the Caribbean sugar, molasses, rum going back to the Americas or back to Europe. This made many people wealthy, but much of it was illegal and immoral, such as the slave trade, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Now, the Dutch, the first half of the 1600s, the Dutch were the dominant maritime power, the golden age of the Netherlands. Anglo-Dutch wars between 1652 and 74 weakened the Dutch trade. King Louis XIV also further weakened Dutch trade in the Atlantic. The Netherlands knew that their trade was declining, so they shifted to banking rather than trade and made a lot of money in banking. Now, the slave trade, the use of slave labor was necessary for sugar and labor-intensive crops in the Indies, and so they started bringing in slaves. 10 million Africans were taken from the continent and forced into slavery. 50% of those were on British ships, which is a huge number. Most slaves were captured by rival African tribes and sold to Europeans for goods such as cloth, alcohol, or weapons. 20% of the people that were forced into this middle passage between Africa and the New World died during this trip. And it was horrendous conditions, almost unbearable, quite often unbearable, and something I don't even want to think about. Now, there were some financial difficulties during this time, some bubbles. Both Britain and France had large debts. Government sought to sell the debt to stock companies who looked to make some quick money. Now, this didn't work. 1720, British South Sea bubble, and France, the Mississippi bubble, both stock trading companies, burst. Stocks dropped and fell, and there was a large-scale financial crash. So when you think about the stock market crash in the 1930s, late 1920s, 1930s, the depression that took place, well, this was taking place back in 1720. Colonial wars between 1701 and 83. There were many British and French wars between each other. A lot of it had to do with the colonies in the New World. The 7 Years' War, as it was called, and we've talked about this before, the 7 Years' War in Europe, or the French and Indian War in North America, was very costly for both the British and the French. So not only were they fighting in Europe, they were also fighting in North America. The war was fought in Europe, but also North America and around the world. The British won, and in the Treaty of Paris in 1763, the British gained all North America, the parts of India, or most of India, and parts of the Indies, and through some roundabout trades, Florida. The American Revolution in 1775 and 1783, the British defeated and lost a lot of power. The French gave a lot of their support to the Americas, some of which would hurt King Louis XVI, who would ultimately, lose his head during the French Revolution. A lot of it was due to the debt from the American Revolution. So these are our notes for 18th Century Society. I think this is our second series of notes. Remember, history is no mystery. Take good notes.